Okay, so now that it's in the Mac, let's hear the boot up sequence and all kinds of sounds it makes. Now, this was boosted artificially a little bit just to give you the sense of what I hear in a very silent room. So it seems that the story about Apple not putting in a dust filter into a Mac Pro, it may be actually true. The reason was they said that it would make the fan noise louder because the air would be bouncing off of it. As you can see here, this is exactly what's happening. The air from the fans is bouncing off the RAID enclosure because it cannot go through the RAID enclosure as it can with the GPUs. Here's an example of how it sounds without it. You hear that? Nothing. That's how my Mac Pro sounds like without this RAID enclosure in. So by default, Promise sets this array up as a RAID 5, and it comes with 24 terabytes pre-configured, even though it can really be 32 if we do a RAID 0. So before we begin anything, we're going to install the Promise utility first, which is going to let us manage this array. For the sake of time, I'm actually speeding up through this process at about 200-300x, just so that we can get to it and get to the Pegasus RAID management utility. This is the main dashboard, which is showing us 32 terabytes of drives are actually in use by something. If we look at the physical drives list, we will see 8 terabyte SATA drives installed. However, the most interesting part is logical drive, where we can actually see we have 24 terabytes worth of capacity in a RAID 5 configuration. So at this point, we probably just want to test the speed, right? So let's open up the disk speed test from Blackmagic, select our Pegasus RAID. In this case, it's a still RAID 5 configuration, and see what this baby can do. So as soon as this initial buffer is filled up, we can actually see that the write speeds are about 700 megabytes a second, 600 to 700, and the read speeds are about 550 megabytes per second. For 4 SATA drives in a RAID 5 config giving you 24 terabytes of storage, this is actually quite acceptable. So if you are just coming from watching my previous video where we did 16 1 terabyte drives in a RAID 0 over 4 PCI slots, it may look like a letdown, but this is actually quite good. And now that we have done the required disk speed test from Blackmagic, let's copy this 73 gigabyte file from my downloads folder onto the Pegasus and see how fast it actually goes. I'm going to speed this up and then give you the result of when it's done. So the transfer was done in 1 minute and 41 seconds, which comes to about 726 megabytes per second. Now let's rename this file and copy it back to the Apple SSD and see how fast that goes. So the copy back actually ended up being a little bit slower at 587 megabytes per second. So now that we know the read and write speeds and the copy speeds of a RAID 5 configuration, let's delete this logical drive from the Pegasus array and create us a RAID 0 configuration instead. And now that it's done, let's test the speeds. So it seems that with 4 8 terabyte drives in RAID 0 for a total of 32 terabytes worth of storage, we can actually do about 1 gigabyte per second in writes and about 740 to 750 megabytes per second in reads. Now do keep in mind, this is a storage array which has mechanical drives in it. Unlike is the case with SSDs, which are known to fail very rarely, the mechanical drives are actually much more prone to failure, so I would not recommend running this particular storage array in a RAID 0 configuration unless you really have to. Like if you're using it just as a dump disk, maybe you have like red footage that you just want to dump somewhere and you need 30 terabytes worth of storage temporarily and you have the data elsewhere in case it fails, this would actually do just fine. However, I would recommend running this in either RAID 5 or a RAID 10 config if you want to use it for any kind of real production use. And for completeness, let's copy that same file once again from my Apple Drive onto the Pegasus RAID now that it's running in a RAID 0 configuration so that we can compare RAID 5 versus RAID 0 speeds when copying files around. The improvement is about 265 megabytes per second versus RAID 5, or 991 megs per second. And for the final test, let's go back from RAID 0 to Apple SSD. This time, the increase in speed was about 150 megabytes a second when going from RAID 0 to Apple SSD versus from RAID 5 to Apple SSD. So what are my final thoughts on this storage array? It is very nice that I can fit 32 terabytes worth of storage, or 24 if we want to include some kind of protection, inside my Mac Pro in a very nice modular way. However, the whole concept of it blocking the fans from the front, I did not like personally because it increased the noise in my environment. However, in yours it may be different. At $2,300, I do find it a little bit pricey considering that these drives that are inside it cost no more than $300. So you're paying about $1,000 for the MPX module itself. I guess it does actually have a RAID controller and hardware, it's not a software RAID, so that costs some extra money. However, it does seem a little bit pricey. Overall, as a total package, this is something that fits only into a Mac Pro. If you have room for an extra MPX module and you want this much storage and you do not want to have it on your desk, this is really the way to go. Thank you for watching, and if you like this, please like the video and make sure to subscribe. I would very much appreciate it.